A construction project causing headaches for drivers. It's the redesign of the intersection at St. Paul and Maple Streets. Some of you have reached out to us saying it is hard to navigate and it's causing damage to your cars.
Now, this isn't the first intersection the city's been redesigning. You're looking at the recent rebuild at Main and Champlain Streets. But this latest project at Maple and St. Paul is driving people mad.
Celine McArthur is investigating your concerns and joins us live in downtown Burlington. Celine, what's the issue here?
Well, Kat, Darren, this four-way intersection was designed with these bump outs to provide more room for people walking and hiking in the area, for trees and for rain gardens like this one to keep storm runoff off Lake Champlain. But the space for these added features, it had to come from somewhere, right? It came from the road. The streets here are more narrow and for some drivers harder to navigate. And they say these granite curbs are tearing up their tires. Look, you can see the marks left behind from cars hitting them. Now, city leaders tell me this is the new norm in Burlington and you need to get used to it. But do you?
Construction is almost done at the intersection of Maple and St. Paul Streets, and Mayor Miro Weinberger is clearly excited.
I think in the months and years to come, people are going to think of this as one of the really great streets in Burlington.
Jacob Hinsdale manages the apartment building on the corner and says these upgrades will make his units more appealing to prospective tenants.
I think quite literally the curb appeal is going up because granite curbs, and I think that people will be more happy living here. We're definitely getting a huge upgrade for pedestrians.
That's because the bump out design forces drivers to slow down.
That edge friction is what you call that nervous feeling you get when you go around a bulb at the end of a sidewalk, and that nervousness makes you a safer driver in the end. As irritating as it can be, it makes you calm down, look where you are, slow down, and make sure there are no pedestrians in your way.
But some drivers say the design is unnecessary.
One of the things they said was, we're trying to slow traffic down. How slower can you get when it's a four-way stop? They're just basically telling motorists to stay home and leave your cars at home and don't go to Burlington.
Steve Chardelli says the turns are too tight, especially for trucks, buses, trailers, or emergency vehicles.
If a person is coming down Shelburne Road with a boat to try to get to the boat ramp, to make a left-hand turn, he has to actually go into the other lane, and there's no way he can do it without causing a problem.
We sent up the SkyMax 3 drone to give you a clearer picture of what Steve is talking about. As you can see, this bus can't turn without going into the opposite lane of traffic.
That way sucks. Yeah, and then there's that.
Dennis Ilori lives right up the road and says the design aimed at protecting pedestrians is putting them in greater danger because drivers are focused on making the turn without crashing their cars.
By the time they look at everybody else and they're bouncing off the curb, they don't have time to look for people.
Mike Burnett works at Gastro Grub on the southwest corner of the intersection. He says he lost count of how many cars nailed the curb.
I see it pretty much every day. Sometimes cars pull up at the same time, someone has to back up, especially if it's a bus. And they keep running over the curbs because they're sticking out in the middle of the road. Normally, if you hit a curb, you hit your tire. All I see is people destroying their rims, and those are expensive.
Mike is worried people will avoid the area and find new places to dine. Erica Reddick is active in her local neighborhood planning assembly and is challenging city leaders about the intersection.
It's just stupid. You can't have done that, stepped back, seen people hitting things, and thought, wow, this is a really good idea.
3 weeks ago, I met with city engineer Norman Baldwin to discuss driver concerns. He defended the design, saying this type of development in Burlington is the new norm.
They need to enter with some higher measure of caution than they're used to and settle into how it's designed. We are committed to the concept that pedestrians are the primary interest to be served here.
Mayor Miro Weinberger agrees with his city engineer. Pedestrian safety was a driving factor in the design, but couldn't tell me if the intersection was dangerous.
How unsafe was that for pedestrians? Because I'm not seeing any. I'm trying to pull reports.
Pedestrian accidents in the city every year.
But at that intersection?
And everything we can do.
I asked Burlington PD for statistics. They tell me there have been no pedestrian-involved accidents there in at least the last 3 years. And sometime in the last 3 weeks, since I interviewed the city engineer, the city decided to review the plan.
There's concern that there might be something not quite right about it. There may be a need for an adjustment with it.
Well, because of the possible adjustment, the mayor says they've stopped pouring concrete into these bump outs. Now, if you want to take part in the discussion, mark your calendar for September 17th. It'll be addressed at the next city council meeting for the Transportation, Energy and Utilities Committee sometime between 5 and 7:30 p.m. The address is 645 Pine Street here in Burlington. Now, I asked the mayor how much a rip and redo would cost for this intersection, and at this point he says he does not know. But we will be at that meeting to get some answers for you. In the meantime, we want your feedback. What do you think about this intersection? Email us at news@wcax.com or message me on social media. For now, live in Burlington, I'm Celine McArthur, Channel 3 News.
Tonight, we are digging deeper into a Burlington construction project that many of you are talking about. Channel 3's Celine McArthur is investigating your concerns.
Now, drivers say this design is even worse if you're in a big car, if you have a trailer, or you're driving a bus, or maybe a fire truck, because they can get stuck, and then this area turns into gridlock.
So all of this design was vetted through the fire department, so we feel we're on solid ground that they can properly respond to whatever emergency calls they may have with appropriate equipment.
We've had a few people contact us as well. So the way it works for us is when we have projects like this, we provide the engineers with the specific turning radiuses and the needs of the fire department. And so in turn, they provide that to the contractors. And the expectation is that that's how it's going to turn out, and we'll work that way.
Well, that's the expectation, but is the city delivering? Now, the fire department tells me they have not tested out this area. They have not driven the ladder truck through here, so they can't really comment on it yet. But they do want you to know that you don't have to worry about them getting to you in a time of need, because they plan ahead for challenging intersections or locations that are hard to reach. Now, coming up at 5:30, I talked to some drivers who say this situation is going to be a nightmare during the winter if nothing is changed now.
All great, rehabs of any downtown area are a challenge for people trying to move around the city or live here.
The problem is people are trying to figure it out, and they're not figuring it out. They're not used to this kind of intersection.
Those drivers are concerned about that intersection in Burlington, under construction and tonight under review. Some worry it's going to get worse this winter if nothing is done now. Celine McArthur joins us now, digging into the issue live at that intersection. Celine, why are those drivers now worried about snow come wintertime?
Well, Galen, if they can't easily navigate this area now, they say the snow is going to make it so much worse. Let me show you what we're dealing with right now. We're talking about bump outs. They are at each of the corners of this intersection. Every single driver I've spoken to over the last several weeks says this design makes the corners too tight to turn without going into the opposite lane of traffic, just like you see in our drone video. Now, that bus cannot make the turn, and when there's traffic, nothing moves because the buses and trucks get stuck. It is gridlock. Now, picture this intersection with snow. Last year, we got 103.6 inches of the white stuff in Burlington, and that makes for huge snowbanks.
Once winter comes and we have to plow through there, it's going to be one lane from any one of those intersections to get through because those bump outs are so big. So then what happens?
When you do these bump outs, there are some trade-offs involved in these bump outs, and that it does become, it does add a little bit of challenge to the clearance of snow in the winter.
We've had conversations with our right-of-way team. Obviously going to be a little bit more of a challenge in the past, but we are committed to the concept that pedestrians are the primary interest to be served here.
Locals aren't going to come here, and our tourists are going to tear the shit out of the sidewalls. And you can quote me on that one.
Now, that's just one of the people upset about this Burlington intersection. Celine, you've been following this, Maple and St. Paul. We got so many responses from you. We hear you. A lot of people upset about it. Now, what inspired you to do this? What drove you to the story?
My drive to work. It's my commute every day. So I started to realize there were backups. I started to realize there was gridlock because buses couldn't get through. And then I would actually watch people hit the curbs with their car. So I don't know about you, but I carry a GoPro in my car every day.
Only Celine McArthur
So every day for weeks I started recording it, and this was a regular thing. And then one day I got out, I started talking to people, and across the board, drivers were very unhappy and they wanted some answers.
Now, you spoke with the city engineer about this, and he said that this is the new norm in Burlington.
Yes, which, you know, his thing is every project that they're working on in this Great Streets initiative is pedestrian focused. Here's what he had to say.
Well, Great Street Standard is intended to create a different balance in terms of the use of the public right-of-way, where a lot of the public right-of-way was used to service traffic at the expense of all those other modes, whether it be walking, biking, stormwater improvements, all those things. We now have a different balance of how those all things fit in that space. I'm sure that it's going to be a little challenging for people to adapt, but I think in the end it'll produce what we're looking for, which is to have the right types of uses on the right street to serve the public in the best way possible.
Now, that was 3 weeks ago, that conversation. You also spoke with Mayor Miro Weinberger about this, and what did he have to say?
Well, he said that they're actually now reviewing the project, which makes us wonder, why would you do this in the 11th hour? Was it a design flaw? Was it a construction error? Or did they just realize with enough negative feedback that they needed to review it? So I spoke with him yesterday. Take a listen.
I've had complaints about it. We have had some incidents where people have hit the curb, and there's a bunch of analysis and engineering work going on to review that and to see whether there was an error made in the final design there.
Now, you also reached out to him today for a follow-up. What was the response there?
Well, we asked him actually to come in because we've had so many of you emailing us and calling us and posting messages on social media, so we invited him to come, and they declined our invitation.
Okay, well, let's take a look at some of those responses. Sienna Fontaine says, I busted my wheel open and damaged my rim at the new bump out. And Celine, she told you that cost her $167 just for the tire, right?
And what really stood out is she's upset because she says she reached out to the city twice, and so far no response, so we are going to check in with the city. And also Stephen Chardelli says the mayor's response that people will grow to love the intersection and think it's one of the best in the city, quote, ignores the reality that users will grade the whole project by the major safety issue and inconvenience caused by the bump outs, not how nice it looks.
All right, we've got Karen Fontaine here. She says that she walks the neighborhood regularly and says, I've never seen anything close to a pedestrian accident. Maybe the mayor should stop trying to ban cars and make the city friendly to all. Can't wait until he's up for re-election.
This will be addressed at the next City Council meeting for the Transportation, Energy and Utilities Committee, and it's sometime between 5 and 7:30, so you may want to get there right at 5. And the address is 645 Pine Street in Burlington.
And you plan to be there, right, Celine?
Oh, absolutely. We have a lot of questions that need to get answered.
In the meantime, continue to send us your feedback. News at WCAX.com. Celine, good to see you here at 5:30.
Always.
It's the rebuild of the intersection of St. Paul and Maple Streets downtown. Many of you have complained it's damaging your cars. Nearly a month ago, the city engineer told us people needed to get used to the new design. In our interview with the mayor, 3 weeks later, he admitted the city may have messed up.
Basically, that redesign, we have had complaints about it. We have had some incidents where people have hit the curb, and there's a bunch of analysis and engineering work going on to review that and to see whether there was an error made in the final design there.
Celine McArthur is live downtown where the meeting is about to begin. Celine, you've got some more questions for city leaders, don't you?
I do, Darren, and I followed up with the mayor's office with some of those questions, and the staff sent me back a link to the Great Streets website. Now, when you print it out so you can actually review it, you can see this is not a light read. In fact, it drove a little more questions than answers. So I reached out to 2 independent engineers to help get their take on it and help get you ready for tonight's meeting.
It's the intersection many of you are talking about, calling it confusing, chaotic, costly to drivers, and
it's just stupid. You can't have done that, stepped back, seen people hitting things, and thought, wow, this is a really good idea.
Locals aren't going to come here, and our tourists are going to tear the out of damn sidewalls. Then you can quote me on that one.
They're just basically telling motorists to stay home and leave your cars at home and don't go to Burlington.
Burlington's engineer says drivers have to
enter with some higher measure of caution than they're used to and settle into how it's designed.
Or Or do they? The mayor admits the design may be flawed.
We haven't poured the sidewalks on the south end of it because there is a chance that this review is going to result in saying we need to widen that there, we need to pull it back.
Can you hold this to the inside of the curb?
Kirk Jones has a master's degree in civil and environmental engineering from UVM. He doesn't work for the city and didn't work on the project.
It's about 21.5 feet.
But reviewed the city plan and sees some potential issues with the turns.
There's not enough margin of error. We have parents that have never driven that intersection before. We've got tourists who've never driven that intersection before. We're not just talking about people that's their commute. We're talking about a lot of drivers that are coming in through that intersection that have never been in that intersection before. They've never even seen an intersection like that before.
After driving the route and watching drivers navigate it, the issues become even more apparent.
There's been people honking. People are going around the intersection very carefully. Some people are having to make left turns instead of right turns. A gentleman from the Special Services Transportation Authority, a bus driver, just stopped and said, "This is a nightmare." So it's obvious that it's not simple to navigate. What difference would it make if we came back 3 feet or even 5 feet? You know, is that safer?
I got a second outside opinion on the intersection, a project engineer from Indianapolis, Indiana, to objectively look at the Burlington plan. Gary Duncan says bump outs have benefits, including calming traffic and shortening the crossing distance for walkers, but says, quote, "What I cannot evaluate is the actual need for traffic calming at this intersection. A few things that I can think of to be evaluated would be volume of traffic, the free flow speed on the approaches to the intersection, and the number of pedestrians crossing. If this is already a multi-way stop condition, I would not expect a need to slow traffic down as they are already required to come to a stop."
And what aspect of the city is wanting it versus what aspect of the city needs it?
Jones agrees. He says there's now a bigger issue.
Is it safe? Did they feel safe going through the intersection, as well as bikers, as well as walkers? I'm curious for, emergency drivers, for especially transit drivers, is this intersection safe for them?
For this mailman who doesn't want us to use his name, this intersection is a mess. He's worried things won't get better.
We've gone beyond the point of no return there.
Well, we will see if that's the case. The meeting is set to start at 5:30, and people are already showing up to voice their concerns and hear what the city has to say about it. But as of right now, the doors are still locked. So as soon as I can get inside, I will bring you with me. Live in Burlington, I'm Celine McArthur, Channel 3 News.
Celine, what has happened in the meeting that's happening tonight so far?
Well, Darren and Kat, the meeting really just got started. The city just started talking about their plan, so I'm going to step aside so you can take a look. Now, for the last half an hour, the city was in its listening phase. So it was listening to about a dozen or so residents who came in to talk about their complaints about the intersection. Now, inside that room is the Director of Public Works, Chapin Spencer, his 2 engineers, one of them we've been interviewing for our stories, 3 city council members from the Transportation, Energy, and Utilities Committee, and right now, they were just listening. The challenge so far is that the residents have been voicing their concerns, but they have not been addressing them. They have just said thank you, and they asked for the next person to come to the podium. So I don't know at this point if they're going to directly answer those questions. What I do know now is that the next step is going to be a full presentation. At that point, we will come back to you. We're going to bring you as much information as we can. Darren and Kat, back to you.
From WCAX Channel 3, the Channel 3 News at 11 starts now.
Have taken the public feedback and our engineer assessment of the intersection at St. Paul and Maple Street warrants a minor adjustment.
New at 11, a Channel 3 News investigation gets results. The city of Burlington just agreed to make changes to its Great Streets construction project many of you have been upset by.
And the Department of Public Works says crews will begin the rip and redo as early as tomorrow. Let's show some of those changes.
Now, this is a view of the intersection at Maple and St. Paul Streets from the SkyMax 3 drone. Now, tonight, engineers announced they will shrink these bump outs on the southern side of the intersection to give you more room to make the turns.
Now, they will also cut into the granite curbs at a 45-degree angle to make them less sharp, basically ramping the curbs so you don't damage your tires.
We will be widening the road on St. Paul Street, approaching the intersection from the south from 22 feet to 30 feet in width, so widening it 8 feet, 4 on each side. In addition, we're making the curbs have a greater radius, which means that there'll be more room for those turning movements.
Now, Celine, you were there for this meeting tonight. Despite some of these changes Public Works is talking about, it's still defending this project.
Yes, they're calling it a minor adjustment. And despite what they said in our earlier reports, they now say changes were expected.
It's very hard to measure success and failure in this process. And the only way sometimes you can do that is to try things, to experience things, and to hear people's comments and have these hard conversations. And it's very difficult for us, and it's very difficult for the public. And we understand and know that, but we think this is the right thing to do to advance this city and improve this city to the extent that we want it to be.
The biggest surprise was the response to a question from a Burlingtonian. She watched our special, our drone video, our GoPro video, our interviews with people living and driving in the area, and asked why the city didn't do that kind of investigation before breaking ground. Engineer Norman Baldwin said tonight they relied on a computer program.
The study is using the CAD drawings and these turning templates to really establish whether it can function and how it will function. And so what is on paper is different than what is built. And I think that's the challenge.
This so-called minor modification will cost at least $20,000. What the city could not answer tonight, though, is how much this intersection cost to begin with.
Now, Public Works Director Chapin Spencer says the $4.9 million Great Streets Initiative wasn't broken down by each intersection. Now, people who showed up tonight, they were not happy to hear that. Nearly everyone there asked the same question. What did the city learn from this debate?
We identified in the meeting 3 things that we're going to change. One, it relates to how we work with our design engineer with turning movements to make sure we don't have this issue again. Another is we do more subsurface evaluation. And the other is we get a plan to better work with adjacent property owners on addressing their services for their various utilities.
We're still following this. Tomorrow on your Channel 3 News at 5:30, we will break down more of tonight's meeting, including what this means for upcoming projects in the city.
In the meantime, keep the emails coming. news@wcax.com. Tonight, we follow up on a Channel 3 News investigation. Public Works says it will be making changes to a Great Streets intersection many of you told us was chaotic and dangerous. We're talking about the intersection of St. Paul and Maple Streets. I was at the meeting last night where Public Works said they will shrink the bump outs on the southern side of the intersection to give you more room to make that turn. They'll also cut into the granite curbs at a 45-degree angle to make them less sharp, which is basically ramping the curbs so you don't damage your tires. Now, when pressured by the public as to why they didn't do an on-scene analysis before breaking ground, the engineer said they relied on a computer program and says the challenge is that what's on paper is often different than what is ultimately built.
There's things that are on paper, and then there's things that when they arrive and they start to actually become tangible, people start to recognize the problem, and then we start having a conversation. So I blame no one on that. It's very difficult to look at paper and go, well, this will work, well, this won't work, until you actually do it. And that's what we're doing, is we're actually doing it. We're going to learn from it. We're going to grow from it. And we want to hear people's comments.
In the last hour, I spoke with Public Works Director Chapin Spencer about some of the questions you have about the project. He says his team is meeting with the designer and contractors tomorrow to discuss the modifications and will decide then when they're going to make the actual fixes. Now, the cost is $20,000 and comes from a contingency fund within the budget approved by the city. I asked what the entire reno of that intersection is costing the city. Spencer says a rough estimate is $300,000.
Tonight, Burlington's fire chief is reacting to some of the changes proposed at that intersection we've been talking about all week at the city's Great Streets Initiative. And he's also weighing in about if those changes could make the intersection any safer.
Now, his response shed some light on why maybe many of you and the city are not on the same page about how well it's working. Well, it turns out there may be a critical lack in strategic communication.
I think the lesson learned perhaps is to meet with the engineers as they're because the technical specifications that do meet that apparatus can make that swing, there's often more that goes into it. I think we often see plans and conceptual drawings and perhaps At least personally, I was not part of the process where we saw the finalized plans, and perhaps that I think both Public Works and all parties will do that in the future.
Now, Celine, you talked to Mayor Miro Weinberger about this earlier, and you got kind of a different response.
I did. I talked to him about a week before last night's meeting where the decision was made. Today, I reached out to the mayor's office and got zero response. Last week, he said the fire department was involved in this process. The people who are living in the area are concerned that fire trucks and emergency vehicles would not be able to get in time to save someone. As we know, every second counts.
You know, the fire department has been part of the planning here and the sign-off, but in this period of reviewing it, we are again bringing the fire department in.
The chief says he's not worried about that intersection.
But not because of the size of his trucks.
Ultimately, we go straight through that intersection. It's seldom we would turn left or right off that intersection.
People who live in the towers just south of here say they're still worried.
I'm sure the fire chief is going to figure out how they're going to get to my house and put it out, because they can't come down here and make a turn anymore. So it's going to take them longer to respond to Decker Towers.
That sentiment was shared by others at last night's meeting.
Now, Celine, moving ahead, what's next here?
Well, Public Works Director Chapin Spencer says his team will meet with the designer and contractors tomorrow to discuss what they're doing and when, and I will follow up with them to get the specifics.
In the meantime, send us your feedback on Facebook and at news@WCAX.com.
We have new developments in our Channel 3 News special report, construction at a crossroads. Crews are now deconstructing part of Burlington's Great Streets project. Now, this is the southwest corner of the intersection of Maple and St. Paul Streets. The granite curbs are ripped up, and as soon as crews finish this underground work, they will rebuild the curb. Now, these large trucks and trailers will now have more space to make turns, and the road approaching the intersection will be widened by a total of 8 feet. Now, I asked workers how challenging a project this is, and they say, well, it is bigger now that the curbs need to be redone. Public Works says it hopes to get this done by the end of the month at the cost of $20,000. Now, the rough estimate for all the work you see that will be done here at the intersection is about $300,000, and we will keep you posted on their progress and the final costs.